The story of the woman at the well is definitely one about liminal space. This entire scene is exclusively at a well in the city of Sychar, which makes it a type scene. In movies, this would be like a car chase or a courtroom scene. It's kind of that moment that reoccurs from movie to movie. It's different but shares similarities. Like Genesis 24 has a well scene with Isaac, Genesis 29 with Jacob, Exodus 2 with Moses. There's a well scene in Genesis 16, Numbers 21, Deuteronomy 10, 1 Samuel 9, 1 Chronicles 11, and Song of Solomon 4. Like I said, it's a type scene. Things happen at wells. It would be impossible not to write about them in the Bible. Think about it like this. Almost every aspect of daily life in ancient Israel would have involved water, with someone having to go get it. Agriculture, animal husbandry, cooking, personal hygiene, and of course drinking. So here's how the culture adapts to get water. Young women typically have the daily chore of drawing water from the town's well to bring it back in order to supply the family household with enough to cook and clean and share with animals and drink. It's such a daily habit that several biblical verses describe this chore for women in detail, like Genesis 24:11. It says that women go to draw water in the evening using vessels made of either clay or animal skin, and it's carried on their hip or their head. Now, I'm going into detail about all of this because these details matter tremendously to our story in John 4. So let's jump into it together. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus himself, but his disciples who baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee. But he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. There's a lot here. The biggest thing is verse 4. He had to go through Samaria. No, he didn't. Jews can caravan right around Samaria easily. They do it all the time. Now, you probably know the tension between Samaritans and Jews. They don't mix. The brief history is that after the Babylonian exile, Persia mandated that the scattered Jews return to their hometown and rebuild. Now, most did, but some didn't. Years went by, decades went by, and so the people who didn't come home started making their own life. Now, they're still Jewish, but they broke away from the cultural heritage, settled in Samaria, started a family with foreign communities that weren't Jewish, and this became unforgivable. A cultural chasm formed. Jesus didn't associate with Samaritans, and it wasn't supposed to, at least, because he was Jewish. But yet he had to go through Samaria. There's something more here to verse 4. This is deeply spiritual. Jesus had to go through Samaria because he was ready to heal a deep wound. And to do it, he had to enter into the space of liminality. The second detail here is that it's noon. At noon, you're about 6 hours into the workday and you're probably eating a meal. There's absolutely no reason why anyone, unless they're traveling, would need to be at a well. You'd be wasting daylight for such a task, unless you were there to hide. Verse 7. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. This means Jesus is alone with a woman who's Samaritan at a well at noon in Samaria. And then Jesus speaks to her, asking her to serve him, which would have been a statement of honor. He thinks that she's respectable enough to serve. She's good enough to be noticed. She's worthy enough to even be addressed. Now, this is subtle stuff here, but you have to hold the tension to really understand this. Not only do Jews not speak to Samaritans, but men don't communicate to strange women like this. They shouldn't be alone. There shouldn't be the assumption on Jesus' end that this woman is worthy enough to engage him. In Jesus' day, the entire culture is bound up in what scholars call honor and shame. People work to bring honor to themselves and to their constituents. They work to bring honor to family, businesses, friends, community, nationality. It goes on and on. People work even harder to avoid shame. Shame is the worst thing you could do to yourself and to your family. So obviously, strict rules of engagement become the norm in order to keep honor and avoid shame. Everything that would be considered shameful, Jesus is doing. He's alone with a woman who's Samaritan at a well at noon in Samaria. Then he speaks to her, asking her to serve him, giving her personhood worth. Jesus enters into this woman's liminal space. He encounters her in her shame and helps move her to freedom, to consciousness, to acceptance, to salvation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Verse 9. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" Jews did not share things in common with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." Man, this is just a remarkable moment for theology nerds like me. Jesus casually introduces himself as the world's salvation and moves into an incredibly philosophical moment, and it catches the woman off guard. Verse 11. The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and with his sons and his flock drank from it?" Now, in some ways, the woman misses the point here, but that's okay. Who wouldn't? But what she says here is noteworthy. "Sir, you have no bucket." Remember that. Verse 13. Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink of the water that I give them will never be thirsty. The water that I give will become in them a spring of water, gushing up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." She's now starting to get it. She's ready to put down her old way of life, which is never fully says why, but we surmise that it's because she has a rough past. She's at the well at noon, probably to avoid being seen or having to spend time with other women. She's an outcast. She's potentially the town's shame, although it never really says that, but the lens that our culture places on her says that she is. Verse 16. Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come back." And the woman answered, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband.' For you've had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." This is another example of the shame placed on her. Another reason why Jesus should have known better than to engage her. But maybe Jesus is the one who really knows better. Watch what happens next, verse 19. The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." When Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." And the woman said to him, "I know the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us." And Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you." In other Gospels, Jesus doesn't so readily disclose his messianic nature, but here he does. And look who he declares deserving. This is so important that he's choosing a woman in this situation. Verse 27. Just then his disciples came. They were astonished that he was speaking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you want?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" Then the woman left her water jar, went back to the city. She said to the people, "Come and see a man who told me everything I have ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he?" And they left the city and were on their way to him. We'll stop there. The disciples' hesitant response just amplifies this honor and shame dynamic. What Jesus is doing is more than risky. It's crazy, absurd. No one who is anyone would do this. But they don't say anything. They glimpse the holiness of this moment. And as the camera pans to the disciples, you see the woman take off in the background, away from the well, away from her shame, and she returns to the city that shamed her. She goes to the people who have no business engaging her. In verse 30, she tells them everything she had ever done, and they left the city and were on their way to him. What a story. There is so much here. Jesus' acceptance of cultures, Jesus' willingness to break stereotypes, his willingness to engage a shamed woman, his willingness to speak and give honor to her, his willingness to talk to her about her storied past, his willingness to hold it, accept it, forgive it, and then move her forward in faith. This is everything we've been discussing the last few weeks. This woman is caught in liminal space. She is in a threshold crossing. She's in a world of shame, but meets Jesus and is now ready to leave behind that old world and step into honor. She's literally stepping forward in faith. And she's able to do this because of the interaction she has with Jesus. And this is what I want us to see too. We are all in liminal spaces. Our cultural awakening to race, the coronavirus, and our own individual personalized shame is our liminality. We can overcome where we are. We can reauthor our sense of self when we step forward from where we've been, but we can't step forward until we realize Jesus enters into it. Our Savior meets us in our shame and offers us a path towards honor. Wherever you find yourself in life, whatever your liminal space is, you don't have to stay there. You don't have to go backwards. Jesus meets you in the midst of whatever you feel as shameful, and he works it out with you. He names your sin and your shame, identifies you as more than the sum of your past. And when this happens, when you're this deep into the darkness of liminality, and you're one-on-one with Jesus, when you're completely inward, ready to make a change, when that moment comes, you have to be willing to do something. And it's what the woman does in verse 28. She leaves her bucket. Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She left it. Maybe this is a throwaway line, but I don't think it is. When we're in liminal space and we go inward into our shame and we work it out, we name it, we work through it, we enter into the darkness of transition, and when we meet Jesus there, when he comes to us as a shepherd and when he prepares us to step forward into a brave new future with honor and not shame, no matter our past, when all of this happens, we have to do the hard work of leaving our bucket behind. Whatever that thing is that we carried with us into our shame, whatever that thing is that's weighing us down, causing us pain, whatever it is, we have to let it go, leave it behind. It no longer defines us. There's something about stepping forward out from the in-between that requires us to leave something behind. It could be a friendship, or even a spouse, which is hard to say, but it could be true for you. It could be a job. It could be feelings. It could be internal or external or both. It could have to do with your sense of shame or your sense of self-worth. If you ask me, liminality is where the white community is right now in our country. We've been awakened to implicit and explicit biases for race, and we're ready to move beyond it, to step forward into a better tomorrow. For that bucket that we were carrying, it no longer defines us. Liminality is definitely where the black community is too. If this woman at the well represents anyone in our culture right now, it's the black community. They're ready to show the world a better way. They're deeply ready to drop their bucket and show the world the one who knows everything about all of us. And honestly, this biblical moment, it applies on an individual level as well as a macro-cultural level. We are all the woman and the culture and the disciples, and so is everyone else. We all have pain that we need to step forward from. But the absolute kicker for me in all of this story is that she leaves the bucket behind. What a symbol. If you want to step forward from your liminal spaces, you better be ready to shed that which no longer defines you. You have to let go of your shame to experience the joy on the other side. It's not that you can't bring it with you. It's that you no longer need to. You're trading in your sorrow and your shame. You're trading in that thing that is the source of your thirst, and you're upgrading it to living water. Because whoever drinks from the flowing waters of Jesus' love will never go thirsty again.